Ethan Carter woke up slowly, his head pounding as if someone had hit him with a hammer. His eyes fluttered open, but the darkness around him was so thick that he couldn't tell if they were even open at all. He blinked a few times, trying to adjust to the lack of light. The air smelled damp and earthy, like old stone mixed with something metallic. For a moment, panic gripped him. Where was he? What happened? He tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy, sluggish. His hands brushed against cold, rough stone beneath him. That's when it hit him. He was lying on the floor of some kind of dungeon. Memories flooded back in fragments, disjointed and blurry. He remembered walking home after work, the streets quiet and empty under the glow of streetlights. Then, nothing. Just blackness. Ethan groaned and pushed himself into a sitting position. His head throbbed, but he forced himself to focus. He needed answers. Slowly, his eyes began to adjust to the dimness. Faint streaks of light filtered through cracks high above, revealing rows of symbols carved into the walls. They weren't letters or numbers. He didn't recognize them at all. They looked ancient, almost alien. A low hum filled the space, vibrating softly in the background. It wasn't loud enough to be painful, but it made Ethan uneasy. It felt unnatural, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. He pressed his palms against the ground to steady himself and stood shakily. His legs wobbled, but he managed to stay upright. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing off the walls. No response came, just silence, broken only by the faint hum. "Is anyone here?" Still nothing. Ethan sighed and took a step forward, his boots scraping against the uneven floor. As he moved, he noticed something odd about himself. His movements felt different, smoother, stronger. When he reached out to touch one of the carvings on the wall, his fingers tingled as though charged with electricity. Pulling his hand back, quickly he stared at it, confused. What was happening to him? Before he could think too much about it, a voice spoke directly into his mind, not aloud, in his head. It startled him so badly that he stumbled backward, nearly falling over again. "Don't be afraid," the voice said. It was calm, soothing, and unmistakably female. "You're safe for now." Ethan froze, his heart racing. "Who's there?" he demanded, glancing around wildly. There was no one else in sight. The room remained empty except for him. "Where are you?" "I'm not physically here," the voice replied. "But I've been watching over you. My name is Lily." "Lily?" Ethan repeated, frowning. "What do you mean you've been watching me? Where am I? Why can't I remember anything?" "There's no time to explain everything right now," Lily said firmly. Her tone shifted slightly, becoming more urgent. "Listen carefully. You need to leave this place. Follow the passage to your left. Be careful. The path ahead is dangerous." Ethan hesitated, unsure whether to trust her. But what choice did he have? Staying put wouldn't get him any closer to figuring out what was going on. Taking a deep breath, he turned toward the direction she'd mentioned. Sure enough, there was a narrow tunnel leading away from the main chamber. It was dark, barely, lit by the same faint glow that seeped through the cracks overhead. As he stepped inside, the hum grew louder, almost deafening. Ethan winced but kept moving. The tunnel twisted and turned unpredictably, forcing him to duck under low-hanging rocks and sidestep jagged edges. Every so often, he'd catch glimpses of strange markings etched into the walls, different from the ones in the first room. These seemed newer, brighter, pulsing faintly as though alive. After what felt like hours, Ethan reached a large chamber at the end of the tunnel. In the center stood a pedestal, atop which rested an object glowing with an eerie blue light. It looked like a crystal, but its shape was irregular, jagged, as if it had been torn from something larger. Ethan approached cautiously, drawn to it despite his better judgment. When he touched the crystal, a surge of energy coursed through his body. His vision blurred for a second, and when it cleared, he realized he could see things he hadn't noticed before. Tiny details popped into focus: the texture of the stone walls, the faint trails left by insects scurrying across the floor. Even the hum sounded sharper, layered with tones he hadn't detected earlier. What is this thing? Ethan whispered, pulling his hand away. It's part of you now, Lily's voice answered. Or rather, it's unlocking what was always there. You're not just human anymore, Ethan. His stomach churned. Not human? What does that mean? You'll understand soon enough, she said cryptically. For now, keep moving. There's more waiting for you beyond this point. Ethan clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. He hated being kept in the dark, especially when his life, or whatever he was now, was on the line. Still, he didn't argue. If Lily knew something he didn't, then maybe following her instructions was his best shot at survival. The next section of the dungeon was even darker than the last, forcing Ethan to rely on his newly heightened senses. He could hear every creak of the stones beneath his feet, feel every shift in the air as he moved. At one point, he nearly triggered a trap, a series of sharp spikes hidden in the ceiling, but his reflexes kicked in just in time. He dodged them easily, landing gracefully on the other side. This newfound agility surprised him. Back on Earth, he'd never been particularly athletic. Now he moved like someone who had trained for years. Was this what Lily meant when she said he wasn't just human anymore? Finally, after navigating countless twists and turns, Ethan spotted a sliver of natural light ahead. It was faint but unmistakable. Hope surged within him as he quickened his pace. As he drew nearer, he realized the source of the light was a small opening in the wall, a crack wide enough for him to squeeze through. With effort, Ethan pushed aside a pile of loose rocks blocking the exit and emerged into the open air. The sudden brightness blinded him momentarily, but as his eyes adjusted, he gasped at the sight before him. He wasn't on Earth anymore. Towering crystalline structures stretched toward the sky, shimmering in hues of purple and green. The ground beneath his feet was covered in moss-like vegetation that glowed faintly in the twilight. Strange creatures darted between the trees, their forms sleek and otherworldly. Ethan staggered backward, overwhelmed by the alien landscape. This wasn't possible. How had he ended up here? And why did he feel like he belonged? Welcome to Sithyrus, Lily's voice murmured in his mind. Your journey has only just begun. Standing there amidst the surreal beauty of another world, Ethan knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan stood frozen at the edge of the alien world, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The sky above him wasn't blue like Earth's. It shimmered with streaks of gold and deep violet, swirling together like an endless painting. Strange plants glowed softly around him, their light pulsing in rhythm, almost like they were alive. Creatures with sleek, insect-like bodies darted between the glowing trees, their movements quick and silent. Everything about this place felt wrong yet beautiful at the same time. He took a cautious step forward, testing the ground beneath his feet. It was soft, spongy, and slightly damp, unlike anything he'd ever walked on before. His senses were still sharper than usual, and he could hear every rustle of leaves, every distant chirp or buzz from creatures hidden in the shadows. For a moment, Ethan wondered if he was dreaming, or maybe hallucinating, but the ache in his head and the weight of the crystal shard tucked into his pocket reminded him that this was real. As he moved deeper into the forest, his unease grew. The hum he'd heard in the dungeon was fainter now, but still present, vibrating softly in the air. It made his skin prickle as though the planet itself was watching him. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone following him. But the path behind him was empty. Before long, Ethan stumbled upon a clearing. In the center lay a figure curled up on the ground, motionless. At first glance, he thought it might be another creature native to this strange world, but as he approached, his heart skipped a beat. It was human. A woman. She looked younger than him, maybe in her mid-20s, with short brown hair and pale skin smudged with dirt. Her clothes were torn and dirty, but they were unmistakably earth-made. A plain gray jacket, jeans, and sturdy boots. Ethan hesitated for a second, unsure whether to trust her. What if she was part of whatever had brought him here? Or worse, what if she worked for whoever, or whatever, had locked him in that dungeon? But then he noticed the dried blood on her temple and the way her breathing came in shallow gasps. She wasn't a threat. She needed help. "Hey," Ethan said softly, kneeling beside her. "Are you okay?" The woman stirred, groaning weakly as her eyes fluttered open. They were wide with fear at first, darting around wildly until they landed on Ethan. She flinched, trying to scramble away, but her body gave out, and she collapsed back onto the ground. "It's okay," Ethan said quickly, holding up his hands, to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The woman stared at him for a long moment, her expression wary. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "My name's Ethan," he replied. "What about you?" "Grace," she murmured after a pause. "Grace Monroe." Ethan nodded slowly. "Do you know where we are, Grace? Do you remember how you got here?" Grace shook her head, wincing at the movement. "Not really. I was walking home one night and then nothing. Next thing I know, I woke up in some kind of lab. There were these things. Big, tall, with weird glowing eyes. They kept poking me with needles and running tests." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I managed to escape, but I've been running ever since." Ethan frowned. Her story sounded eerily similar to his own experience in the dungeon. "You saw them too? The tall ones with glowing eyes?" "They're called the Veilith," Grace said quietly. "At least that's what I heard them call themselves. They're the ones who brought us here. They've been experimenting on humans for years, trying to figure out why we're different from other species." "Different how?" Ethan asked. His curiosity piqued. Grace hesitated, glancing around nervously. "I don't know all the details, but apparently humans have some kind of potential, something the Veilith want to unlock. That's why they keep capturing us and bringing us here." Ethan's hand instinctively went to the pocket where he'd stashed the glowing crystal. Could that be part of what they were looking for? Was that what made him feel so different now? "We can't stay here," Grace said suddenly, snapping him out of his thoughts. "If the Veilith find us, we're dead." Ethan nodded. "Agreed. Any idea where we should go?" "There's a group," Grace said, struggling to sit up. "A resistance. They hide in the forests, fighting back against the Veilith. If we can find them, maybe they can help us get off this planet." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than wandering aimlessly. Together, Ethan and Grace set off through the forest, sticking to the shadows as much as possible. The further they went, the more signs of life they encountered. Tracks in the mossy ground, discarded tools, even faint traces of smoke rising in the distance. Whoever lived out here, they weren't far away. After hours of walking, they finally reached a small encampment nestled in a dense thicket. Crude shelters made from branches and vines blended seamlessly into the surroundings, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. A group of people sat around a fire, their faces weary but determined. Most of them looked human, though Ethan spotted a few individuals whose features hinted at alien ancestry: pointed ears, scaled skin, or eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. One man stepped forward, his weathered face marked by scars and stubble. He carried a rifle slung over his shoulder and studied Ethan and Grace with sharp, calculating eyes. "You two lost?" he asked gruffly. "We're looking for the resistance," Ethan replied. "We heard there were people fighting back against the Veilith." The man smirked, though there was little humor in it. "You found him. Name's Ryan Blake, leader of this sorry bunch." Ethan introduced himself and Grace, explaining briefly what had happened to them. Ryan listened intently, nodding occasionally but saying little. When Ethan finished, Ryan crossed his arms and let out a low whistle. "Sounds like you've had quite the adventure," he said. "But you're lucky to be alive. The Veilith don't usually let their test subjects escape." "What do they want with us?" Ethan asked. Grace said something about unlocking our potential. "What does that mean?" Ryan exchanged a glance. "With one of the others. a young woman with fiery red hair and freckles scattered across her cheeks. She stepped forward, introducing herself as Mia Harper. "The Valith believe humans are special," Mia explained. "They think we have abilities that other species don't, abilities they can harness for themselves. Some say it's because of our adaptability. Others claim it's genetic. Whatever the reason, they've been hunting us down and experimenting on us for decades." "But why now?" Ethan pressed. "Why start capturing humans en masse?" Mia hesitated, her expression darkening. "Because they've finally figured out how to activate those abilities, and once they perfect the process..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Let's just say it won't end well for the rest of the galaxy." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He thought back to the crystal shard in his pocket and the strange energy coursing through his veins. Was that what the Valith were after? Had they already started changing him? "We'll explain more later," Ryan said, interrupting his thoughts. "For now, you should rest. Tomorrow we'll teach you how to survive out here and maybe even fight back." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. As he and Grace settled into one of the makeshift shelters, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something much bigger than himself. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. Somehow he knew his journey was only beginning. The next morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of quiet voices and the smell of something cooking over a fire. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes as he adjusted to the dim light filtering through the trees. Grace was already awake, sitting near the fire with Mia, the red-haired woman from the night before. They were talking in low tones, their expressions serious. Ryan stood nearby, cleaning his rifle with steady, methodical movements. Ethan got up and joined them, feeling stiff and sore from sleeping on the hard ground. "Morning," he said, trying to sound casual despite the knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. "Sleep well?" Ryan asked without looking up from his weapon. "As well as you can when you're stranded on an alien planet," Ethan replied dryly. The others chuckled, but it was a hollow laugh. No one here was under any illusion that their situation was anything but dangerous. Ryan set the rifle aside and gestured for Ethan to sit. "All right, listen up," he began, his tone sharp and businesslike. "You two are lucky to be alive, but luck won't keep you breathing for long out here. If you want to survive and maybe even fight back, you need to learn how to handle yourself." Ethan nodded, glancing at Grace. She looked nervous but determined, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Whatever fear she felt, she wasn't letting it stop her. That gave Ethan a small measure of comfort. At least he wasn't alone in this. "First things first," Ryan continued. "We'll teach you how to defend yourselves. The Valith aren't the only threat out here. This forest is full of predators that would love nothing more than to make a meal out of you." Over the next few hours, Ryan and Mia drilled Ethan and Grace on basic survival skills. They showed them how to build traps using vines and sharpened sticks, how to identify edible plants, and how to move quietly through the dense undergrowth. Ethan found himself picking up the lessons quickly, his heightened senses giving him an edge. He could hear the faintest rustle of leaves or the distant snap of a twig, allowing him to anticipate danger before it arrived. But it wasn't just physical training. Ryan also taught them about the Valith, their strengths, their weaknesses, and their technology. "They're fast and strong," Ryan explained, holding up a piece of alien tech, a sleek black device that hummed softly in his hand. "Their weapons are advanced, but they rely too much on them. If you can get close enough, you've got a chance." Ethan frowned, studying the device. It looked like nothing he'd ever seen before, smooth, featureless, and almost organic in design. "What does it do?" "It's a stunner," Mia answered. "One shot and you're out cold. Non-lethal but effective. The Valith prefer to capture rather than kill. Dead subjects don't give them much data." Grace shuddered visibly. "So we're just lab rats to them?" "In their eyes." "Yeah," Ryan said bluntly. "But that doesn't mean we have to let them win." As the day wore on, Ethan began to feel a spark of hope. For the first time since waking up in that dungeon, he felt like he had some control over his fate. Ryan and the others weren't just teaching him how to survive. They were showing him how to fight back. And if there was one thing Ethan hated, it was being powerless. By late afternoon, they moved on to combat training. Ryan handed Ethan and Grace crude spears made from sturdy branches and sharpened stones. "These won't match the Valith's weapons," he admitted, "but they're better than nothing. Now show me what you've got." Grace hesitated, gripping her spear awkwardly. Ethan stepped forward first, mimicking the stance Ryan had demonstrated earlier. He jabbed the spear toward Ryan, who easily sidestepped and knocked it aside with his own weapon. "Too slow," Ryan barked. "Again!" Ethan tried again, putting more force behind his strike this time, but Ryan blocked him effortlessly, sending the spear clattering to the ground. Frustration bubbled inside Ethan, but he forced himself to stay calm. He retrieved the spear and faced Ryan once more. This time, something shifted. As Ethan focused, he felt a strange energy coursing through his body, like a current of electricity running beneath his skin. His movements became smoother, faster. When he lunged at Ryan, the older man barely managed to deflect the blow. Ryan raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Not bad. Looks like whatever those bastards did to you is starting to kick in." Ethan lowered the spear, breathing heavily. "What's happening to me?" "You're adapting," Mia said softly, stepping closer. "The Valith's experiments unlocked something inside you, abilities you didn't know you had. You're stronger, faster, more aware of your surroundings. Over time, you'll learn to control it." "But why me?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "Why not everyone else?" Mia exchanged a glance with Ryan before answering. "We don't know for sure. Maybe it's genetic, or maybe it's because of that crystal you found in the dungeon. Either way, you're special, Ethan, whether you like it or not." Ethan clenched, his fists unsure whether to feel grateful or terrified. Being special came with risks, especially in a place like this. Still, he couldn't deny that these newfound abilities gave him an advantage, one he intended to use. Later that evening, after the training session ended, Ethan and Grace sat by the fire with Mia. The others had gone off to patrol the perimeter, leaving the three of them alone. Ethan stared into the flames, lost in thought. So much had changed in such a short time. He'd gone from an ordinary guy living an ordinary life to whatever he was now. A fighter, a survivor, maybe even a leader. "What happens next?" Grace asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I mean, we can't stay here forever, right? Eventually, we'll have to face the Valith head-on." Mia nodded. "She's right. Hiding in the woods isn't a long-term solution. We need to hit them where it hurts, take out their labs, sabotage their operations, make them regret ever setting foot on this planet." Ethan looked at her, surprised by the intensity in her voice. There was pain behind her words, anger simmering just below the surface. "What did they do to you?" he asked gently. Mia hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. "They took my family," she said finally. "Captured them during a raid on our village. I've been trying to find them ever since." Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. He couldn't imagine what it must be like to lose everything, to have no idea whether the people you loved were alive or dead. "We'll help you," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Mia looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. For the first time since arriving on Zetheris, Ethan felt a sense of purpose. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting, for freedom, for justice, for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. And if that meant taking on the Valith, then so be it. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled, overhead Ethan made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't let fear hold him back. Not anymore. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them head-on. Because deep down, he knew one thing for certain. He was ready. Days turned into weeks as Ethan and Grace settled into life with the Resistance. Each morning began with training, each evening ended with planning, and every moment in between was spent preparing for the fight ahead. Ethan's abilities continued to grow stronger, more refined. He could move faster than ever before, sense danger from farther away, and react almost instinctively to threats. Grace, too, was improving, though her progress was slower. She didn't have the same enhancements as Ethan, but she made up for it with determination and cleverness. Mia became a constant presence in their lives, teaching them not just how to survive, but how to think like fighters. She showed them maps of the Valith facilities, explaining which ones were most critical to sabotage. Their central lab is where they conduct most of their experiments, she said one evening, pointing to a spot on the map. If we can destroy, it will cripple their operations for months. It won't be easy, Ryan added, leaning against a tree nearby. The place is heavily guarded. Getting in and out alive will take precision. Ethan nodded, studying the map carefully. The facility was deep within Valith territory, surrounded by patrols and automated defenses. It would be a suicide mission if they weren't careful. But despite the risks, he felt a spark of excitement. This was their chance to strike back, to show the Valith that humanity wasn't going to go quietly. As the group finalized their plans, tensions began to rise. Supplies were running low and tempers flared over minor disagreements. Ethan did his best to stay out of the arguments, focusing instead on honing his skills. But even he couldn't ignore the growing unease among the rebels. Something, or someone, wasn't right. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan found himself unable to sleep. He sat outside his shelter, staring up at the strange, swirling sky. The hum that had followed him since the dungeon was louder here, almost deafening at times. It made it hard to think clearly, harder still to relax. Just as he was about to give up and try sleeping again, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, quickly he saw Mia approaching. Her face was pale, her expression troubled. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. "Sure," Ethan replied, gesturing for her to sit beside him. "What's wrong?" Mia hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "I need to tell you something," she said finally. "Something I should have told you sooner." Ethan frowned, his stomach tightening. "Okay. What is it?" She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "The Valith, they didn't just capture my family. They captured me, too. For years, I was one of their test subjects. They tortured me, experimented on me, tried to break me. Eventually, they let me go, but only because they thought I'd be useful to them." Ethan stared at her, stunned. "Useful? How?" "I'm a double agent," Mia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "They forced me to spy on the resistance. If I refused, they threatened to kill my family." For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. Betrayal burned hot in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can't do it anymore," Mia said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I joined the resistance because I wanted to fight back, to protect people like you and Grace. But every time I send information to the Valith, I feel like I'm betraying everything I believe in. I don't want to hurt anyone. Please, Ethan, you have to help me." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to confront Ryan immediately, to expose Mia for what she was. But another part of him understood why she'd done it. The Valith had taken everything from her freedom, her dignity, her loved ones. Could he really blame her for doing whatever it took to save them? "What do you need me to do?" he asked finally. Mia looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. "You're not going to turn me in?" "I didn't say that," Ethan replied firmly. "But if you're serious about helping us, you need to prove it. No more secrets, no more lies. Work with us to take down the Valith for real this time." Mia nodded, relief washing over her features. "Thank you, Ethan. You won't regret this." The next day, Ethan pulled Ryan aside and told him everything. To his credit, Ryan listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Ethan finished, Ryan let out a long sigh. "I suspected something was off," he admitted. "But I didn't want to believe it, not Mia." "She's willing to help us," Ethan said, "and we need all the allies we can get." Ryan nodded, slowly. All right, we'll give her a chance, but if she screws us over, it's on you. Ethan agreed, though the weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. He knew trusting Mia was a risk, but it was one they had to take. Without her inside knowledge of the Valith, their chances of succeeding were slim. With Mia's cooperation, the Resistance put their plan into motion. They gathered weapons, supplies, and intel, preparing for the raid on the central lab. The night of the attack, the group moved silently through the forest, sticking to the shadows. Ethan led the way, his heightened senses guiding them past patrols and traps. Grace stayed close behind him, clutching a makeshift spear tightly in her hands. When they reached the outskirts of the facility, Mia signaled for them to stop. "This is it," she whispered. "From here we split up. Ethan, you and Grace head for the main lab. Ryan and I will create a diversion to draw the guards away." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. "Be careful." "You too," Mia replied. Her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The two teams separated, disappearing into the darkness. Ethan and Grace moved quickly, slipping through gaps in the perimeter fence and navigating the maze-like corridors of the facility. Alarms blared faintly in the distance, evidence of Ryan and Mia's distraction. So far, so good. As they approached the main lab, Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment they'd been working toward. But just as they reached the door, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. It was a Valith soldier, tall and imposing, its glowing eyes fixed on them with cold precision. "Stop right there," it said in a voice that sent chills down Ethan's spine. Ethan tightened his grip on his spear, ready to fight. Beside him, Grace raised hers as well, her hands trembling but resolute. The Valith lunged forward, moving faster than anything Ethan had ever seen. But he was faster now too. Dodging the attack, he swung his spear with all his strength, striking the creature squarely in the chest. The Valith staggered back, letting out an unearthly screech. Before it could recover, Grace delivered the final blow, driving her spear into its side. It collapsed to the ground, unmoving. Panting, Ethan turned to Grace. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her face was pale. "Let's finish this." Together, they entered the lab. Inside, rows of tanks lined the walls, each containing a human suspended in green liquid. Some were unconscious, others awake and staring blankly ahead. Ethan's stomach churned as he realized these were the missing test subjects, people like him, like Grace, like Mia. "We need to free them," Grace said, her voice shaking with anger. Ethan agreed, but they didn't have much time. Setting the tanks to self-destruct, they hurried toward the control room, where the core systems were housed. As they worked to disable the facility, alarms screamed louder, red lights flashing throughout the building. The Valith were closing, and just as they finished planting explosives, a squad of soldiers burst into the room. Ethan and Grace fought fiercely, using every trick Ryan had taught them. But there were too many. Outnumbered and cornered, they braced themselves for the end. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from behind the Valith. Ryan and Mia appeared, mowing down the enemy with relentless efficiency. "Go," Ryan shouted. "We'll hold them off." Ethan hesitated, torn between gratitude and guilt. "You sure? Just go," Ryan roared, reloading his weapon. With one last look, Ethan and Grace sprinted toward the exit. Behind them, explosions rocked the facility, sending shockwaves rippling through the air. As they emerged into the cool night, the flames lit up the sky, a fiery testament to their victory. But the cost weighed heavily on Ethan's mind. How many more sacrifices would they have to make before this war was over? And could they truly win against an enemy as powerful as the Valith? Standing amidst the chaos, Ethan clenched his fists. Whatever came next, he was ready. The explosion behind them lit up the night sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Ethan and Grace stumbled forward, their lungs burning as they pushed themselves to keep moving. The heat of the blast warmed their backs, but it wasn't enough to chase away the chill of what they'd just left behind. Ryan and Mia had stayed behind to cover their escape. Had they made it out alive? Or had they sacrificed themselves to give Ethan and Grace a fighting chance? Ethan didn't let himself think about it too much. He couldn't afford to. Not now. Not when every step forward brought them closer to safety or further into danger. Keep moving, he urged Grace, glancing over his shoulder. The flames from the lab were visible even through the thick trees, illuminating the forest in an eerie orange glow. The Valith would be scrambling to contain the damage, but Ethan knew it wouldn't take long for them to regroup and start hunting for survivors. Grace nodded, her face pale but determined. She was breathing hard, her legs trembling with exhaustion, but she kept pace with Ethan. "We're not stopping yet, are we?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "No," Ethan replied firmly. "Not until we're far enough away that they won't find us." They ran for what felt like hours, weaving through the dense undergrowth and dodging obstacles in the dark. Ethan's heightened senses guided them, helping him avoid pitfalls and hidden dangers. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sent his heart racing, but so far there was no sign of pursuit. Still, he didn't let his guard down. The Valith weren't known for giving up easily. Finally, they reached a secluded clearing near a stream. The water glistened faintly in the moonlight, its surface rippling gently as it flowed over smooth stones. Exhausted, Ethan and Grace collapsed onto the damp ground, their chests heaving as they tried to catch their breath. "We need to rest," Grace murmured, her voice barely audible. "Just for a little while." Ethan hesitated. Part of him wanted to keep going, to put as much distance between them and the ruins of the lab as possible, but the other part knew they couldn't push themselves any harder without risking collapse. Reluctantly, he nodded. 10 minutes, he said. Then we move again. As they sat there, catching their breath, Ethan's mind raced. What had they really accomplished tonight? They'd destroyed one facility, freed some of the captured humans, but at what cost? Ryan and Mia might be dead. The Valith would only grow more desperate, more aggressive. And Ethan still didn't fully understand why the aliens were so obsessed with humanity. Why go to such lengths to experiment on them? What was it about humans that made them so valuable? Before he could dwell on those questions too long, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. It wasn't Grace. It was Lily, speaking directly into his mind once again. "You've done well," she said, her tone calm but tinged with urgency. "But this is only the beginning." Ethan frowned, looking around instinctively, even though he knew she wasn't physically present. "What do you mean?" he asked silently, unsure if she could hear him. "The Valith aren't your only enemy," Lily continued. "There are forces at play here that even they don't fully understand. You've been chosen, Ethan, not just by me, but by something far greater." "Chosen for what?" Ethan demanded, frustration bubbling inside him. "Why can't anyone give me a straight answer?" Lily paused, as if considering how much to reveal. "Your ancestors were part of an ancient alliance, a coalition of species working together to maintain balance in the galaxy. But that alliance fell apart, leaving humanity scattered and forgotten. Now the Valith seek to exploit your potential, believing it will grant them ultimate power. But they're wrong. Only you can decide how to use your abilities, for good or for destruction." Ethan's head spun. Ancient alliances, galactic balance. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, not real life. Yet deep down he knew Lily wasn't lying. Everything she'd said lined up with what he'd experienced. The strange energy coursing through his veins, the crystal shard that seemed to pulse with life, the way he could sense things others couldn't. "So what am I supposed to do?" he asked finally. "How do I stop them?" "That's for you to figure out," Lily replied cryptically. "But remember this. You're not alone. There are others who share your destiny. Trust them, and trust yourself." Her voice faded, leaving Ethan sitting in silence. Grace glanced at him curiously. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You look distant." "I'm fine," Ethan lied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking." Grace didn't press him for details, and for that he was grateful. He needed time to process everything Lily had told him. If she was right, if humanity really did have a role to play in restoring balance to the galaxy, then the stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about legacy, about hope. After their brief rest, Ethan and Grace pressed on, following the stream deeper into the forest. By dawn, they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a vast valley. In the distance, they spotted signs of civilization, tall spires rising above the horizon, glowing faintly in the early morning light. That must be one of their cities, Grace whispered, awe mingling with fear in her voice. Ethan nodded, studying the skyline carefully. If we can get close enough, maybe we can learn more about their plans, figure out where they're keeping the other prisoners. But how? Grace asked. We can't just walk in there. They'll recognize us instantly. We'll find a way, Ethan said confidently. We always do. Over the next few days, Ethan and Grace scouted the outskirts of the city, gathering information and avoiding patrols. They discovered that the Vaylith were mobilizing their forces, preparing for a large-scale offensive against the resistance. Whatever advantage the rebels had gained by destroying the lab was quickly slipping away. One evening, as they huddled beneath the cover of a rocky ledge, Grace voiced the question that had been weighing on both their minds. Do you think Ryan and Mia made it out? Ethan sighed, staring into the fire they'd built to ward off the cold. I don't know, he admitted. But if anyone could survive that, it's them. Grace nodded, though her expression remained troubled. I just wish we knew for sure. Before Ethan could respond, a faint sound caught his attention, a soft rustling in the bushes nearby. Instantly, he was on his feet, spear in hand. Grace followed suit, gripping hers tightly. Together, they scanned the darkness, waiting for whatever, or whoever was coming. To their surprise, it wasn't an enemy that emerged from the shadows. It was Mia. She looked worse for wear, her clothes torn and her face streaked with dirt. But she was alive. And she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Ryan, limping slightly but otherwise intact. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Grace broke the silence, rushing forward to hug Mia tightly. You're okay, she exclaimed, relief flooding her voice. Mia managed a weak smile. Barely, she admitted. But yeah, we made it. Ryan stepped forward, his usual gruff demeanor softened by gratitude. You two did good back there, he said, nodding at Ethan. Better than I expected. Ethan shrugged modestly, though pride flickered in his chest. We couldn't have done it without you guys. Ryan smirked. True enough. But listen, this isn't over. The Vaylith are planning something big. We intercepted communications suggesting they're targeting the Resistance's main base. If we don't act fast, they'll wipe us out completely. Ethan exchanged a glance with Grace. Then we need to warn the others, he said firmly, and prepare for another fight. Ryan nodded. Agreed. Let's move. As the group set off toward the Resistance's base, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. They'd lost so much already, friends, allies, innocents, but they hadn't lost hope. Not yet. As long as they kept fighting, kept pushing forward, there was still a chance to turn the tide, and Ethan intended to make sure they took it. The journey back to the Resistance's base was long and grueling. Ethan, Grace, Ryan, and Mia moved quickly but carefully, avoiding open areas and sticking to the shadows. The Vaylith patrols were everywhere now, their numbers swelling as they prepared for their next attack. Every step felt like a gamble, every sound a potential threat, but Ethan's heightened senses guided them, helping him spot danger before it struck. By the time they reached the base, the sun was setting, casting the forest in hues of orange and purple. The rebels greeted them with a mix of relief and concern. Word had spread about the destruction of the central lab, but so had rumors of the Vaylith's retaliation plans. Everyone knew what was coming, and no one was ready for it. Ryan wasted no time calling a meeting. The group gathered around a makeshift table in the center of the camp, lit by the flickering light of oil lamps. Maps and diagrams covered the surface, detailing the layout of the Vaylith stronghold and their troop movements. Ryan pointed to a cluster of symbols on one map. "This is where they're planning to strike," he said grimly. "If we don't stop them, we lose everything." Ethan studied the map closely, his mind racing. The target wasn't just any location. It was the heart of the resistance. Their safe haven. Their home. If the Valeth succeeded, it wouldn't just be a tactical defeat. It would destroy morale completely. "We need to hit them first," Ethan said suddenly, his voice firm. "Before they have a chance to mobilize," Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You mean attack their main stronghold? That's suicide." "It's risky," Ethan admitted. "But it's our best shot. If we take out their command center, we cripple their entire operation. Without leadership, their forces will fall apart." Mia nodded slowly. "He's right. It's dangerous, but it could work. We know their weak points better than ever thanks to the intel we gathered at the lab." Grace hesitated, glancing between Ethan and Ryan. "What about the others? The civilians here? If we leave to fight, who protects them?" "We'll evacuate as many as we can," Ryan replied. "Send them deeper into the forest where the Valeth won't find them. The rest of us stay behind to hold the line." It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was all they had. Over the next few hours, the rebels sprang into action. Some worked to fortify the base, setting traps and reinforcing defenses. Others helped organize the evacuation, guiding families and wounded fighters to safer ground. Ethan and Grace joined the strike team, preparing weapons and supplies for the assault. As night fell, the air grew heavy with tension. Ethan sat by the fire, staring into the flames as he tried to steady his nerves. He thought about everything that had brought him. Here, the dungeon, the crystal shard, Lily's cryptic warnings. He still didn't fully understand why he'd been chosen or what role he was meant to play in this galactic struggle. But one thing was clear. He couldn't turn back now. Grace approached quietly, sitting beside him. "You okay?" she asked. Softly, Ethan shrugged. "I don't know. I keep thinking about what happens if we fail." Grace smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure we don't." Her words gave him a small measure of comfort. Together, they stood and rejoined the others. The strike team gathered near the edge of the forest, waiting for Ryan's signal. When it came, they moved silently through the darkness, heading straight for the Valeth stronghold. The fortress loomed ahead, its towering walls glowing faintly under the alien sky. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their glowing eyes scanning the horizon. Ethan led the way, using his enhanced senses to guide the group past traps and sentries. They slipped inside through a hidden entrance Mia had discovered during her time as a double agent. Inside, the corridors were eerily quiet, illuminated by pulsing blue lights embedded in the walls. The hum Ethan had grown accustomed to was louder, here, almost overwhelming. It made his head ache, but he pushed through it, focusing on the mission. They reached the command center without incident, surprising even themselves. The room was massive, filled with strange machinery and glowing screens displaying maps and data. At the center stood a figure clad in sleek black armor, Kale, the leader of the Valeth. Kyle turned as they entered, his glowing eyes narrowing. "You're persistent," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "But persistence alone won't save you." Ethan stepped forward, gripping his spear tightly. "We're not here to negotiate," he said firmly. "We're here to end this." Kale smirked, raising a hand. Instantly, energy crackled around him, forming a shimmering barrier. "Very well," he said. "Let's see if you're as special as your kind claims." The battle erupted in chaos. Kyle unleashed waves of energy, forcing the rebels to scatter. Ethan dodged and weaved, his movements faster and more precise than ever before. He could feel the power within him surging, responding to the adrenaline coursing through his veins. With a roar, he lunged at Kale, striking at the barrier with all his strength. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the room. To Ethan's surprise, the barrier cracked slightly. Encouraged, he attacked again, pouring every ounce of energy he had into the blow. This time the barrier shattered, leaving Kale exposed. The Valeth leader snarled, launching himself at Ethan. The two clashed fiercely, trading blows with terrifying speed. Kale was strong, stronger than any opponent Ethan had faced before. But Ethan had something Cale didn't: determination. For every punch, every kick, Ethan countered with equal force, driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. Finally, seizing an opening, Ethan drove his spear into Cale's chest. The Valith staggered back, his glowing eyes dimming as he collapsed to the ground. For a moment there was silence. Then alarms blared, red lights flashing throughout the fortress. "We need to go," Ryan shouted, pulling Ethan away from Cale's body. The group retreated quickly, retracing their steps toward the exit. Behind them, explosions rocked the stronghold as the systems overloaded. By the time they reached the fortress was engulfed in flames, its glow lighting up the night sky. Back at the base, the remaining rebels cheered as news of their victory spread. The Valith forces, leaderless and disorganized, began retreating. For the first time in years, there was hope. But Ethan knew the fight wasn't over. As he stood watching the distant fires, Lily's voice echoed in his mind once more. "You've taken the first step," she said. "But the galaxy is vast, and your journey has only begun." Ethan nodded silently, resolve hardening in his chest. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them,